Hey guys, tonight we're gliding into a tale that's as dusty as it is dazzling, as unexpected as it is quietly dramatic. You're standing under a velvet Iranian night sky. The stars scattered like spilled sugar across the roof of the Middle East. The air smells of jasmine, motor oil, and something else: ambition. You're in Tehran sometime in the 1950s, but the city is already dreaming decades ahead. Neon lights flicker on new concrete towers while somewhere behind them, lab coats rustle and typewriters click. Someone is whispering the word atom. You're about to get pulled gently, maybe unwillingly, into a Cold War rabbit hole where Iran and Israel become odd bedfellows, allies, partners, co-conspirators, in a world where nobody trusts anybody, but everyone still picks a dance partner. And you're just a sleepy little fly on the wall, listening. Oh, and let's be real, by the time this is over, your brain might not survive the mild confusion. Unexpected alliances, secret pipelines, revolutions, and nuclear blueprints. Yep, it's like Succession meets a history textbook, but with way more sand and fewer swear words. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a step. It's 1957. The concrete is still warm from the Tehran sun, but the shadows are stretching longer. Iran is ruled by a man called Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, a monarch with a polished mustache and an obsession with westernization. He calls it modernization, of course, but it mostly means highways, sunglasses, and scary secret police. But under the shiny surface, things are moving. You peer through heavy velvet curtains and see scientists, both foreign and local, huddling over blueprints. Iran has just signed on to the United States Atoms for Peace program, a charmingly misleading Cold War initiative that pretends to spread peace by mailing out nuclear research kits like they re Christmas cookies. America hands Iran a research reactor. For science, they say, and the Shah? He smiles and starts dreaming of uranium. You pass through the marble halls of the University of Tehran, where sleepy-eyed students are being trained to become the country's nuclear pioneers. The Shah doesn't just want to copy the West, he wants to outshine it. He imagines Iran becoming the Japan of the Middle East, complete with reactors and missiles, and possibly a few warheads tucked politely behind the roses. Historians still argue whether the Shah ever truly intended to build nuclear weapons this early, or if he just liked having the option on the shelf. Like a bottle of scotch, nobody drinks, but everyone admires. Meanwhile, back in Israel, things are tense. It's a young country, barely 9 years old, still sore from the wars it's fought just to exist. They don't have oil, but they have brains and paranoia. Lots and lots of paranoia. The kind that keeps you up at night thinking about every possible threat coming over every possible border. You know, the fun kind. Israel is also quietly exploring the atomic world. They aren't broadcasting it just a hush-hush partnership with France. Some desert construction and a well-practiced shrug whenever someone asks what's going on down south near Dimona. Nothing, obviously, just sand. And then somehow, quietly, inevitably, these two countries start glancing at each other across the region. They don't share religion, language, or direct borders, but they share a growing sense of isolation. Israel, surrounded by Arab hostility. Iran, a Shia monarchy in a Sunni sea. Neither is exactly the prom queen of the Middle East. So, they talk. Carefully, discreetly. You stroll past a quiet cafe in Istanbul, where an Iranian diplomat accidentally bumps into an Israeli one. They exchange business cards, maybe share a cigarette, and then nothing. Or so it seems. There's a knock at your mental door, and it's David Ben-Gurion, Israel's founding prime minister, whispering something you weren't supposed to hear. He believes in peripheral alliances, making friends with the oddballs, the outliers, the non-Arabs in a region mostly hostile to Israel's existence, and Iran. Iran is looking mighty peripheral right about now. So begins the dance. You might call it a Cold War waltz. Not quite love, not even like, but mutual interest. You lean in and overhear murmurs about weapons, oil, intelligence, and shared enemies, all while pretending in public that no such friendship exists. The desert wind whistles as you float over a timeline where nuclear research starts to overlap. Iran builds more labs, imports more equipment. Israeli scientists take notes. There are rumors half asleep and unproven that Israeli advisors might have walked through Iranian facilities. No selfies, of course. No evidence. Just the vague smell of shared ambition. Meanwhile, America watches with one sleepy eye open. The Shah is their golden boy in the Middle East, a reliable autocrat. Friendly to business, tough on communism. He throws cocktail parties with the CIA. What could possibly go wrong? You stroll through one of those parties now. Silver trays, soft jazz, American diplomats with too tight smiles, Iranian generals with too tight uniforms. Somewhere in the back, someone jokes about building a bomb just in case. Everyone laughs. Then everyone stops laughing a little too quickly. The fringe detail tonight. Somewhere around this time, an Iranian beauty Queen Lashah's cousins starts dating an Israeli jet pilot. It's all very hush-hush, but it's the kind of weird historical gossip that makes textbooks more fun. Did it influence anything? No, but it definitely happened. Outside, under the sleepy orange glow of Tehran's street lamps, you pass a mural of the Shah gazing majestically into the future. He has no idea what's coming. Not the revolution, not the exile, not the awkward YouTube videos that will someday analyze his downfall over lo-fi beats. You're back under the stars now. Somewhere in a quiet room, a Geiger counter ticks softly. Iran and Israel, two very different countries, are laying down the first threads of a secret friendship stitched with mutual suspicion, shared dreams, and a whole lot of geopolitical insomnia. Tomorrow, you'll wake up inside a coup. But for now, just rest here in this strange little chapter of history, where enemies weren't always enemies, and allies came wearing very unexpected shoes. You wake up to the sound of leather soles clacking down a marble hallway. A man in a tailored suit walks past, flanked by military officers and secretaries carrying folders full of secrets. The year is 1953, and Iran is about to take a sharp, sleepy left turn. The man everyone's whispering about is Mohammad Mossadegh. You trail behind him like a ghost, watching him pace around his modest office, mumbling about oil, justice, and British hypocrisy. He's a nationalist, the elected prime minister, and very possibly the last person standing between Iran and full-on monarchy. Also, he wears pajamas under his robes sometimes. The guy is eccentric, yes, but in a charming, anti-imperialist way. Here's the situation. For decades, Britain has controlled most of Iran's oil through a company called Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, better known today as BP. They take the oil, sell it, and leave Iran with a pittance. Mossadegh doesn't like that, so he nationalizes the oil. Just takes it back. Like grabbing your lunch back from the British kid who swiped it. Cue the international freakout. Britain wants its oil back. America, always the nosy older cousin, gets involved too. This is the Cold War, after all. And any move that looks remotely anti-Western immediately gets stamped with the giant red communist sticker. Never mind that Mossadegh isn't even close to a communist he is, just a nationalist with boundary issues. But perception matters, and so Operation Ajax is born. You drift into a smoky CIA backroom in Washington, where American and British agents are laying out maps, leaflets, and bags of cash. The plan is simple. Bribe some journalists, stir up protests, fake some riots, and get the military to arrest Mossadegh. Classic regime change starter pack. The codename TPAJX sounds like a cleaning product, but it'll scrub Iran's democracy pretty clean. As the coup unfolds, you walk through crowds of confused protesters, some paid, some not. Shops shutter. Radio stations go silent. Mossadegh's home is stormed. He's arrested, tried, and placed under house arrest for the rest of his life. No more pajamas in public. And just like that, the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi returns from exile and reclaims power. The monarchy is back. But this time, it comes with an American twist. The CIA plants its feet inside Iran's soil, metaphorically and sometimes literally. It's not a partnership, it's a shadow. Historians still argue whether the coup was the real beginning of Iran's long anti-American resentment. Many say yes. Others say the resentment goes back even further to the 19th century imperial games. But one thing's for sure, the 1953 coup didn't just change Iran, it rewired it. You tiptoe through the years following the coup, watching as the Shah consolidates his power. Political parties disappear. Dissidents vanish or reappear in much smaller pieces. And somewhere in a basement, a new organization is born, the SAVAK. It's Iran's new secret police, trained by the CIA and Mossad, with methods that don't exactly scream friendly. This is where Israel starts to lean in again. You shuffle into a quiet meeting room in Tel Aviv, where intelligence officers are reviewing reports on Middle Eastern threats. Israel sees the new Iran CIA-backed anti-communist, rich with oil, and thinks, useful. There's no formal recognition, of course. Iran doesn't want to alienate its Arab neighbors. But in the shadows, contact begins. It's subtle. Trade delegations that aren't official. Diplomatic cables routed through third countries. Joint intelligence briefings. And yes, the occasional dinner party where people pretend not to know who each other are. It's like high school, but with more espionage. Back in Iran, you stroll past a newly built freeway, a gift from the Shah's modernization drive. He's pouring oil money into infrastructure, education, fashion, and Western-style industry. Women in Tehran start wearing miniskirts. Men grow mustaches that seem to curve with pride. The city buzzes. But beneath the buzz is a quiet hum of unease. Not everyone loves the Shah. Not everyone believes in his white revolution, a top-down reform package meant to placate the poor and impress the West. Some think it's just window dressing. Others think it's heresy. Religious scholars begin to grumble. Students get restless. The poor remain poor. And in the distance, like a tape deck rewinding too slowly, the voice of a cleric named Ruhollah Khomeini starts gaining volume. But for now, the Shah reigns supreme. And in this lull, Israel finds its quiet moment to become not just a partner, but a hidden ally. One fringe detail floats by you like a feather in the wind. In 1958, just 5 years after the coup, Iran's military hosted Israeli defense officials under complete secrecy. They posed as European contractors. One Israeli officer later joked that the codenames were so clumsy, even the Iranian janitor knew what was going on. You settle into a chair at a sleepy government archive where dusty folders reveal more. Covert weapons deals, agricultural technology exchanges, and trade missions masked as private business trips. A cargo ship full of Israeli produce once docked in Bandar Abbas under a fake Turkish flag. That's some committed citrus. You hear a radio playing in a Tehran bazaar. The music is Western, the conversation in Farsi, but the mood is watchful. Iran's people are adapting to the Shah's vision, but something always feels just a little off, like the country is trying to dance to someone else's rhythm. Israel doesn't mind. For now, the arrangement works. It gains a regional foothold, a backdoor to the Persian Gulf. and most importantly an oil route outside the Arab boycott zone. Iran gets weapons, intelligence, a sense of protection against its real nemesis, the Soviet Union. The Cold War looms over it all. Like a silent ceiling fan spinning too fast above your bed. Everyone's nervous. Everyone's pretending not to be. One night, you stumble into a quiet villa in northern Tehran where a cocktail party is in full swing. There's French wine, British diplomats, Israeli agents disguised as European businessmen, and Iranian elites discussing market expansion while glancing nervously at the curtains. You sip something sweet and pretend not to notice the Mossad guy adjusting his wire. Outside, Mossad's ghost still lingers. His portrait has been taken down, his name rarely spoken, but in the hearts of many Iranians, especially the older ones, he remains a symbol, a motif. A reminder that Iran once chose a different path before it was yanked away. You leave the party, step into the night, and walk past his old house. The windows are dark. The gates are rusted. And the echoes of what could have been are quieter now, but still there, just beneath the lull of Tehran's shifting sleep. You're back under the Tehran sun, squinting a little as golden light bounces off chrome bumpers and mirrored aviator sunglasses. The year is somewhere in the early 1960s, and the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi's officially in his main character era. He's everywhere, on the radio, in school books, even staring back at you from stamps like a particularly judgmental uncle. He's not just a monarch anymore, he's the Shahanshah, the King of Kings, a title so grand it practically echoes when whispered. His palace gleams like a Bond villain's weekend home. White marble, gold trim, soft carpets that swallow your footsteps whole. But beneath the glamour, a man obsessed with staying in control. You stroll through the peacock throne room. It's empty right now, save for 2 guards and the faint scent of expensive cologne. The throne is not actually made of peacock feathers, by the way, but don't tell the tourist brochures. It sits like a challenge to anyone thinking of shaking the monarchy's grip. The Shah doesn't just want to rule. He wants to be adored, feared, and forever remembered in bronze. His modernization project, the White Revolution, is in full swing. Land reforms, women's suffrage, literacy corps, industrial expansion. It sounds progressive, and parts of it are, but to the rural elite who just lost their land, to the conservative clerics watching women vote for the first time, to the middle class suffocating under corruption and inflation, it all feels like a glossy poster covering a cracked wall. You pass through a school where girls in uniforms recite state-approved slogans. They smile, yes, but there's tension in the air, like they've been asked to act in a play with no rehearsal. Outside, boys with shaggy Beatles haircuts trade band cassette tapes of speeches by this rising clericomani. You pause, his voice is slow, gravelly, hypnotic. Even on tape, it pulls you closer. But the Shah doesn't see it yet. He's busy rubbing elbows with world leaders, throwing Versailles-style parties, and receiving medals from Western governments. He calls Iran an island of stability in a sea of chaos. Spoiler alert, it's not. Back in Israel, things are a little more nervous. While Iran is rolling out carpets, Israel is rolling through conflicts. The Six-Day War is coming, and Israel knows it's going to need more than just military strength, needs regional strategy, and Iran is becoming the jewel in that crown. You peer into a hush-hush strategy meeting in Tel Aviv. Israeli defense ministers, some with maps, some with martinis, are discussing Iran like it's a high-risk investment with amazing returns. They can't say it out loud, but they know. If Iran remains friendly, even secretly, it's a massive win. Access to oil, intelligence on Arab states, a Persian-backed channel in a hostile Arab world. And the Shah, he's playing both sides. Publicly, Iran supports Arab causes and makes the occasional vague condemnation of Israel to keep appearances tidy. Privately, there are handshake deals, backdoor meetings, and very very quiet visits by Israeli diplomats to Tehran, often disguised as business people. One even posed as a Dutch rug merchant. Can't make this stuff up. This isn't alliance. This is performance. Historians still argue whether the Shah truly believed in his relationship with Israel or whether he was simply using them like a temporary power outlet, plugging in whenever the American socket wasn't enough. But Israel keeps investing. You float above a scene in an Iranian airfield, where crates labeled machinery parts are unloaded. Inside, Israeli radar systems and communications tech. Sometimes they come through third parties, sometimes through complete deniability. You pass a luxury hotel lobby in Tehran, where a Mossad agent sits reading a newspaper upside down. Not because he's clumsy, he's just waiting. Iranian intelligence, trained in part by Israelis, is becoming sharper. SAVAK agents now know how to trail a suspect without being seen, how to bug a phone without leaving static, how to smile while interrogating. The partnership between Iran and Israel is solidifying like jello in a gold-plated mold. You can't always see it, but it's definitely there. Back inside the palace, the Shah starts slipping into a deeper obsession with grandeur. You wander through his private wing where mirrors stretch from floor to ceiling. It's said he once installed a mirror behind his desk, so visitors could always see his face even when they were kneeling. One night, at a state dinner, the Shah muses aloud about leading a regional Bloca Persian renaissance. He talks about nuclear energy, supersonic jets, and an empire reborn under his rule. Everyone claps politely. Some worry silently. The fringe tidbit tonight? During this period, the Shah commissions a national anthem remix. He hires composers from Europe to modernize it. The result is a piece that sounds like something from a 1970s sci-fi film, trumpets, and just the right amount of self-importance. You ride through Tehran in a black government car, windows tinted, whispers rising from the street. Discontent simmers. Some shopkeepers grumble that prices are up again. Students joke that the Shah smiles more for cameras than for his people. Mullahs hold increasingly fiery sermons behind closed mosque doors, and yet the West loves him. Western newspapers call Iran a miracle of development. American presidents toast to his health. European CEOs sign fat contracts, and Israeli officials quietly drop by for trade talks. Everything's shiny, everything's fine, but you feel it, don't you? That flicker in the air. The false calm before a sandstorm. Late at night, in a quiet bookstore near the University of Tehran, a student flips through a translated French novel, while another one buys a banned political essay. In the back, someone's tuning a shortwave radio, trying to catch Khomeini's broadcast from exile. You pass SAVAK headquarters, a building that doesn't appear on any map. The lights are always on. You feel the tension humming through its walls. Trained in part by Mossad and CIA officers, its reputation is terrifying. Detainees whisper stories of windowless rooms and questions that never end. The Shah, for all his reforms, rules through fear as much as through vision. Iran is modernizing but not liberating. Not yet. And Israel, ever pragmatic, plays along. As long as the Shah holds power, their covert friendship remains. You drift past a Tel Aviv war room where Israeli officials review topographical maps of Iraq, Syria, Egypt, and always Iran. Friend today, unknown tomorrow. By the time you settle into another overfurnished salon in North Tehran, the Shah is pouring imported scotch and boasting about Iran's first domestically built tank. It's not entirely domestic, but who's counting? The room laughs. The chandelier sways slightly, and outside, the revolution is still a whisper. Just a whisper. You're standing at the edge of a ballroom in northern Tehran, the kind where the chandeliers look like upside-down jellyfish and the champagne flows with suspicious ease. But you're not here for the glitter. You're here for the secret. Because tonight, while the violins play and the politicians smile too hard, Iran and Israel are about to begin their strangest diplomatic dance. It's not love, not even friendship. It's the geopolitical equivalent of two people slow dancing in the dark with paper bags over their heads. You wander past silk curtains into a side room where the real party is happening. No music, no laughter, just quiet murmurs and flickers of eye contact. Israeli envoys traveling under diplomatic cover via third countries like Switzerland or Turkey sit across from Iranian officials. They're sipping tea, trading folded papers, circling arms deals on napkins. Nothing official, nothing public, but everything essential. It's the 1960s turning into the 1970s. And things in the region are tense okay, more like spaghetti strained through it tense. Israel is still fresh off the Six-Day War, and Arab hostility has hit new levels. Embassies are being burned, alliances are fraying, and every neighbor has binoculars aimed across the border. So Israel starts looking beyond the Arab world north, east, sideways, anywhere. That's when the doctrine of the periphery really takes root. Remember that term, you've heard it before. Peripheral alliances. Israel's strategic fantasy league of non-Arab allies. Turkey, Ethiopia, maybe even India. But above all, Iran. Iran, that big, oil-rich, non-Arab heavyweight with a westernized monarch and a shared enemy in Arab nationalism. You float above the map and see the logic. Iraq, Syria, Egypt, no-go zones. But Iran, that's a backstage pass to the region. The Shah, meanwhile, is realizing he needs friends too. His country is wealthier and oil prices are skyrocketing, and Iran is cashing in. But wealth makes you paranoid. You get noticed. You get envied. And Iran has plenty of enemies of its own, from Iraqi Baathists to Soviet-lined revolutionaries. So when Israel shows up with offers of technology, intelligence, and backdoor access to Washington, the Shah leans in. You find yourself inside a modest meeting room in Rome, one of several unofficial rendezvous points over the years. Israeli representatives, fluent in French, Hebrew, and some fairly solid Farsi, are laying out plans. Oil, weapons, radar, military training, surveillance tech, you name it, they're discussing it. Historians still argue whether this moment, the early 1970s, was the peak of Iran-Israel cooperation. Some say yes. Others argue it came later, in a burst of last-minute desperation just before the revolution. But here's what everyone agrees on. This is the part where it gets real. You drift beside a dusty Land Rover rattling across the Iranian countryside. Inside are Israeli agricultural experts, sunglasses on, sleeves rolled up. Officially, they're Turkish or Dutch. In reality, they're part of a quiet program sharing irrigation techniques, water management systems, even crop genetics. Israel has the tech. Iran has the land. It's a match made in denial. And the military stuff. Oh, it's happening. You hover above a desert airstrip where crates of Israeli-made weapon parts are unloaded under the moonlight. Not tanks, not missiles, not yet. But enough radios, sensors, and counterinsurgency gear to make a noticeable difference. There's even talk, barely whispered, of shared contingency plans. If Iraq were to invade Iran, would Israel strike from the west? Maybe, maybe not. The files are probably still redacted or burned. Back in Tehran, the Shah is pulling bigger moves. He starts investing in state-of-the-art arms from everywhere. The US, the UK, France. But he likes Israeli efficiency. Israeli weapons are compact, rugged, and most importantly, untraceable. You peek into a weapons demonstration held in a remote testing ground outside Isfahan. Israeli advisors are showing off a new kind of drone well, a prototype. It's crude by today's standards, but revolutionary at the time. Iran's generals nod. Deals are made. Signatures go down on paper that will never see daylight. And somewhere in all of this, oil starts to slither into the conversation. Israel is oil-starved. Ever since the Arab boycott began, it's had to scrounge from unreliable sources. Tankers get rerouted, prices fluctuate, but now with Iran. There's a pipeline in the works. You descend into the coastal town of Eilat, Israel's southernmost tip on the Red Sea. There, quietly, a pipeline is constructed stretching all the way across Israel to the Mediterranean port of Ashkelon. It's built undercover, jointly owned and financed in part by Iran. It allows Iranian oil to be offloaded in Eilat, pumped across Israel, and then shipped to Europe, bypassing the Suez Canal, bypassing Arab pressure. You float above the vast pipe, a metal artery pulsing beneath Israeli soil, fueled by Iranian crude. It's so secret that few in either country even know it exists, but it's real. And for a while, it works. Of course, none of this is official. Iran doesn't recognize Israel. Israel doesn't acknowledge the pipeline. It's all winks and middlemen and pretend embassies in Swiss hotels. You almost trip over a Mossad officer disguised as a yogurt exporter. The fringe tidbit tonight. A Tel Aviv-based company once sold prefabricated Israeli houses to Iran shipped, in parts, assembled on site. The catch: every house came with a kosher stove setup. Iranian customs never noticed. Or maybe they did. Maybe they just didn't care. But beneath the smooth dance, cracks are forming. You pass a mosque in Qom, where a black-turbaned cleric is railing against corruption, Western influence, and the Shah's decadence. He speaks of moral decay, of imperialism, of a nation losing its soul. His name, of course, is Khomeini. His voice, distributed on cassette tapes smuggled across the country, begins to spread. His followers grow in number, gathering quietly in basements, seminary schools, and prayer halls. And while the Shah waltzes with his secret partners, the floorboards begin to creak. Still, the partnership holds. You peek into a Tehran high-rise where Israeli engineers are helping set up telecommunications infrastructure. You glide through an army base where Iranian soldiers are testing Israeli rifles. And always, there's teeth, sweet, served in tiny glasses while men with too many secrets smile just enough. And then there are the dances, literally in 1974. The Shah throws an extravagant gala at Persepolis to celebrate 2,500 years of Persian monarchy. Kings, queens, and dictators from all over the world attend. So do some unnamed European guests, who might be carrying Israeli passports under French aliases. The party costs millions. The food is flown in from Paris. The tents are silk. The rugs are hand-woven. And the music plays late into the desert night, even as the revolution gathers like thunder on the horizon. You look around, the dance continues. Iran and Israel, two odd partners, spinning slowly in the dark hands, joined, eyes closed, pretending the music will never stop. You're awake in the middle of a warm, humming silence, the kind that feels like a ceiling fan spinning above a polished mahogany table in a Cold War embassy lounge. The 1970s have fully arrived, bell-bottoms and all. But here in the Middle East, the fashion doesn't distract from the strategy. The Cold War is everywhere now, like background radiation, none detectable but constant. And you're sliding slowly through the shadows where Iran, Israel, America, and the Soviet Union play the world's longest, sleepiest game of diplomatic chess. You start in Tehran, where the Shah's regime shines brighter than ever. Oil money is flooding in after the 1973 oil embargo sent global prices sky high. Iran is rich now, really rich. The Shah has declared that his country will be among the world's top 5 powers by the end of the decade. Ambitious? Sure. Delusional? Possibly. But the Shah believes it tans, so does his inner circle. You find yourself at a military parade. Tanks clatter down the avenue, jets screech overhead, and high-ranking officers nod solemnly under mirrored sunglasses. And among the observing guests, some with little flags tucked into breast pockets are unofficial Israeli liaisons. Their presence is, of course, entirely unacknowledged. The Cold War lens is what really brings Iran and Israel into sync. billions in F-14s, AWACS, and missile systems. But it's not just planes and gear. He wants intel. And that's where Israel slips in again quietly. You float into a dimly lit war room in Tel Aviv. Maps of the Middle East are spread out across the table. Dotted lines, coded tags, and pins representing known Soviet listening posts. Israel shares intel with Iran, everything from Syrian troop movements to Egyptian radar sweeps. In return, Iran provides access to their own networks in the Persian Gulf and even glimpses into Soviet activity near their border. You drift now to a cocktail party in Washington. A strange mix of State Department wonks, Mossad analysts on assignment, and Iranian diplomats. They all clink glasses with carefully worded compliments and occasionally retreat to side rooms where the real work happens, memorandums that guarantee exist. Sealed envelopes, whispered promises. Historians still argue whether America knew just how much Iran and Israel were cooperating at this stage. Some declassified documents suggest a quiet green light. Others hint at plausible deniability. The general idea, as long as they're helping us fight communism, let them play nice. And the Soviets. They're not blind. You pass by a Soviet embassy office in East Berlin, where analysts are furiously typing cables. Possible Iranian-Israeli coordination suspected in Kurdish region. Surveillance intercepts suggest shared signals intelligence protocols. But the USSR has bigger fish to fry, like the US missile gap and Brezhnev's eyebrows. Back in Iran, the Shah is diversifying. He doesn't just want oil money, he wants industry, aerospace, nuclear energy, and cultural dominance. He starts buying into Hollywood films, funding Western art galleries, and commissioning Persian translations of Shakespeare. He's trying to craft a legacy that isn't just oil and opulence, that brings you to another quiet room. This one's beneath the Nuclear Research Center at Tehran University. American technicians and Iranian scientists work side by side, their lab coats ghosting past glass panels and humming machines. Israel, possibly involved here too. Cade, not overtly, but Israeli nuclear advisors have visited under educational pretexts. You glance at a chalkboard equation that looks oddly familiar, U-235's centrifuge yield calculations, and something vaguely. Weapons adjacent. Still, Iran insists it's peaceful. It's about energy. About science, about progress. You hear the Shah say it again and again. Iran will build 20 nuclear reactors by 1995. Ambitious? Maybe. But the groundwork is being laid. Israel, meanwhile, is walking a tightrope. Officially, it maintains ambiguity on its own nuclear program. Unofficially, the whole world suspects Dimona isn't just for peaceful research. And here, as the twist, Israel doesn't necessarily want Iran to have a bomb. It's happy to let Iran think it could one day have one. It's like nuclear flirting. You drift to the edge of the Persian Gulf now, where an Iranian naval base buzzes with imported technology. Israeli consultants have been helping here too, mostly in radar systems and early warning infrastructure. Again, quietly. Always quietly. The fringe tidbit tonight. In the mid-1970s, Iran funded the construction of a massive Israeli listening post on Mount Hermon. Why? Because it gave both countries better ears on Syrian and Lebanese movements. One hand washes the other hand. Then they both pretend they never met. Inside Iran, though, the story's getting harder to control. The Shah's modernization programs are backfiring. Inflation is spiking. Rural populations are uprooted. Religious leaders are being pushed aside or imprisoned. And Savak, now a massive machine of repression, grows more aggressive. You pass a prison wall at night and hear the echo of rubber soles and questions with no answers. Khomeini, still exiled, grows louder. His tapes now play in taxis, in bazaars, in college dorm rooms. His words are slow, deliberate, seething. He calls the Shah a tyrant, a puppet, a slave to Zionism and American corruption. He doesn't name Israel directly at first, But the message is clear, and in Israel, the situation begins to look risky. Officials review scenarios. What if the Shah falls? What if the revolution is anti-Western and anti-Israel? What if all these deals become evidence? For now, they double down. Keep the channels open. Keep the weapons flowing. Hope it holds. You glide into a Tel Aviv archive, where a dusty folder labeled Sapphire contains notes from an Israeli military embedded in Tehran. The tone is hopeful. Shah's regime stable for foreseeable future, it says. But the ink is barely dry before street protests begin in Iran. Still, the parties continue. You pass through a lavish embassy garden party in northern Tehran. Champagne, caviar, French jazz. Beneath it all, subtle unease. The American ambassador makes a joke. The Israeli guest chuckles too loudly. Everyone looks at the sky for a moment too long, and the Soviet Union. It watches from afar, amused. The Americans are too involved. The Israelis are overinvested. The Shah is dancing too close to the edge. They just need to wait. Let it unravel. You take a final stroll tonight down a corridor in the Israeli Ministry of Defense. The lights are low. The hallway is quiet. But at the end, a room glows faintly. Inside, a map of Iran is pinned with colored dots: intelligence assets, trade routes, listening posts. It's not panic, not yet. But someone's hand is hovering over the contingency file. The alliance still stands, but the wind is changing. And you, sleepy traveler, are just beginning to feel the chill. You're drifting now through one of those beige hotel lobbies that smell like lemons and bureaucracy. There's a fruit bowl on the counter, a plastic fountain gurgling in the corner, and someone behind the front desk who definitely knows more than they're telling. You're in Tehran, sometime around 1976, and a pair of very normal-looking men are checking in with very not normal luggage. Inside those bags, not suits, not socks, not even bribes. Inside are blueprints, communication intercept devices, a few small arms, and at least one photo of an airfield taken from 5,000 feet. Welcome to the world of Israel's quiet military presence in Iran. You're about to sit in on one of the most unlikely friendships of the 20th century. Two countries that, on paper, shouldn't be talking, now working so closely that even the pilots are swapping notes. You follow one of those men, an Israeli intelligence officer who goes by a French name, into an upstairs conference room. It's quiet, a table, a fan turning lazily overhead. Across from him sits an Iranian general with a thin mustache, a polished pistol, and just enough charm to make small talk about pistachios before getting to the point. Weapons? Israel's not just selling arms to Iran at this point. No, this is collaboration. They're sharing tech, adapting designs. You rewatching the beginning of what will become a network of military coordination far deeper than most alliances ever go. Out on a runway just beyond Tehran, Iranian pilots are now training in Israeli-made aircraft. Not frontline fighters. No, those still come from the US, but Israel has specialized tools, recon drones, targeting systems, portable radar jammers, all quietly repainted in desert tan and fitted with Farsi language manuals. And while the gear is impressive, it's the intelligence exchange that really shines. You lean over a map spread out between the Mossad and Savak. It's Iraq again. They both hate Iraq. Iraq hates them right back. The Ba'athist regime under Saddam Hussein is growing more aggressive, more Soviet-aligned, and more unpredictable. Israel wants to destabilize it. Iran wants to check it. So, naturally, they team up. One operation leads you to a dusty village in Iraqi Kurdistan. You can feel the grit under your shoes as Israeli advisors, yes, Israeli, pass quietly among Kurdish fighters. The Kurds are fighting for autonomy from Baghdad. Iran arms them to keep Iraq busy, and Israel sees the Kurds as a perfect pressure point. You watch Israeli specialists help train the Kurds in guerrilla tactics, how to rig a supply line, how to vanish into the mountains. All this under the radar, with support flowing through Iran's border posts like rivers that only run at night. Historians still argue whether this was about ideology, strategy, or simple spite. The truth, probably all three. The enemy of my enemy is my temporarily funded militia partner. Back in Tehran, the Shah is growing more comfortable with Israeli involvement. You pass a sealed airbase near Shiraz, where Israeli advisors are now testing radar installations jointly designed to monitor both Soviet aircraft and regional threats. One officer jokes about naming the radar falafel because no one will ever believe it as real. You catch a glimpse of another Israeli import one with far-reaching consequences. It's not a missile, it's a briefcase full of counterinsurgency manuals. Pages of diagrams, interrogation techniques, urban surveillance strategies. Israel's been fighting underground threats for decades. Iran, with its growing unrest, wants the same tools. You hover inside a training facility where SAVAK agents are learning how to tap phones, tail dissidents, and neutralize threats, whatever that might politely mean. The classroom smells like stale coffee and dread. And all this, every bolt, every lesson, every satellite photo comes with a mutual understanding. Don't talk about it, ever. Israel still has no embassy, no flag raised. Its presence in Iran is a state secret. Even Israeli diplomats refer to their visits as ghost trips. The fringe tidbit tonight. In 1977, an Israeli company helped construct a horse racetrack on the outskirts of Tehran. It was a gift to the Shah's inner circle. Though the real value wasn't horsette, was the surveillance equipment wired through the VIP booths. Back in Israel, officials are watching Iran with a mix of admiration and anxiety. They love the access, the influence, the shared threat awareness. But the signs of unrest in Iran are getting louder. The Shah is throwing more money at security. Protests flare up and are brutally crushed. Ayatollah Khomeini's tapes are now a whispering presence in every university dorm. You pass a newspaper kiosk in downtown Tehran. On the front page, a glowing profile of the Shah's reforms. Inside, buried 3 pages deep, a report on student protests in Tabriz. SAVAK has censored most of it, but the people talk, the bazaars buzz, the mosques hum with energy. Something's building. Meanwhile, Israel presses forward. You peek into a basement workshop where Iranian engineers are being trained in advanced drone components, Israeli designed, with custom tweaks. Surveillance drones are becoming more than a curiosity. They're a glimpse of the future, and both countries want in. There's even quiet discussion, half serious, half wishful, about joint missile projects. Iran's geography, Israel's design brilliance. Combine the two, and you might get a delivery system that makes every enemy nervous. Nothing confirmed, nothing signed. But the blueprints keep circulating. You slip into a Tel Aviv backroom where military planners debate a chilling what-if. If Iraq ever goes nuclear, could Iran launch a preemptive strike with Israeli targeting data? The fact that this is even being discussed shows just how deep the strategic connection has become. And yet, for all the coordination, all the plans, there's a tremor under your feet. Iranian generals smile a little too tightly. The Shah's face appears more often on billboards than in public. Savas-Pay's prisons are overflowing. Even at lavish parties in North Tehran, the laughter sounds like it's hoping to be believed. And back in Israel, the mood shifts. One Mossad memo, written late in 1977, says it plainly. Our partner is strong, but not unshakable. The Iranian Revolution is not yet in motion, but it's on the runway, wheels spinning, engine humming. And when it takes off, everything built in this quiet, complicated, code-named alliance will start to fall from the sky. You walk through one more meeting. An Israeli liaison, now on his 15th vacation in Tehran, hands over a binder marked with a meaningless code. Operation Flower. Inside are schematics for a weapon system that no one will admit exists. The Iranian official nods. No words are spoken. Outside, the streets of Tehran are getting louder. Inside, the quiet deals continue. but not for much longer. You open your eyes to the shimmer of polished stone, warm light filtering through stained glass windows in the capital city of Tehran. But there's something different now. The streets are louder. The traffic, once a steady hum beneath the luxury, now stutters with roadblocks, rallies, and the occasional burst of tear gas. It's 1978, and you've arrived just as the music changes. The record scratches, and the Shah's perfect facade starts to warp. You step into the royal palace opulent as ever, but now the air feels thinner, the chatter more hushed. Staffers carry files under their arms with that extra bit of speed reserved for emergencies disguised as routine. The Shah, once ever confident, paces slowly, eyes bloodshot, hands twitching near his belt buckle. Something's off. He's tired and very much alone. Outside, you drift among the people. They're marching now first in small pockets, then in massive waves. Millions. Clerics, students, shopkeepers, children on shoulders. Signs rise into the sky. Death to the Shah. Freedom for Iran. No more imperialism. This isn't just a protest anymore. It's a revolution. And from a distant suburb of Paris, the voice of Ruhollah Khomeini echoes across cassettes, mosques, radios. He's become more than a man, he's a symbol. A ghostly passenger on every street corner. His return to Iran is being planned like the second coming. Israel watches in horror. You hover above the Israeli embassy in Tehran. Well, technically, it's a commercial office. The flag never flew here, and the address was never published. But make no mistake, inside, panic has replaced paperwork. Israeli diplomats, agents, and military advisors begin burning documents by the box. Faxes go unanswered. Flights are booked one way. For years, Iran and Israel have built a house of secrets together. But now, the foundation is cracking. Fast. In late 1978, you're standing beside an Israeli arms advisor in a hangar outside Isfahan. He's mid-sentence when the lights go out. Sirens whine in the distance. The base commander turns pale. Protesters have surrounded the gates. Inside, crates of unmarked Israeli weapons sit waiting for pickup. They'll never make it out. You walk beside those advisors as they're herded into military trucks. Evacuation time. On Israeli whispers, "We thought we had more time." He's not wrong. Just months ago, they were finalizing a new agreement for advanced missile defense systems. Now, they're leaving behind more than just hardware. They're leaving behind trust, influence, entire pipelines, literal and metaphorical. The fringe tidbit tonight. One Israeli contractor was so embedded in Iran's oil logistics that he reportedly kept a Persian rug in his Tel Aviv apartment scented with rosewater from Isfahan. He left it behind in the rush. It still sits in an abandoned villa, rolled up in dust. You pass through the Iranian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The halls are strangely quiet. Many staffers have already fled or joined the revolution. But the phones still ring. One of them is a panicked Israeli envoy trying to reach anyone who can confirm their safety. No one picks up, and then it happens. February 1st, 1979. You're standing on the tarmac at Tehran's Mehrabad airport. The plane descends slowly, a commercial Air France flight packed with press and purpose. The door opens. Ayatollah Khomeini steps out. The crowd erupts. It's quiet where you're standing, not from silence, but awe. The kind of hush that comes when something enormous lands on your chest and refuses to move. He doesn't wave. He doesn't smile. He simply walks into history, into power. Within weeks, the monarchy collapses. The Shah flees, terminally ill and politically irrelevant. Khomeini's movement sweeps the government. Ministers are replaced. Trials begin. And the Islamic Republic is declared. You fly now through a whirlwind. Revolutionary guards taking over airbases. Religious leaders issuing edicts. Young men with new uniforms but old resentments. And Israel? Israel becomes a swear word. You return to the streets of Tehran, where once covert relations with Tel Aviv are now broadcast in anger. Protesters burn the Israeli flag. The commercial office is stormed. Any remaining documents are seized. Israeli staff, those who couldn't flee in time, are detained, interrogated, and then deported under heavy guard. Historians still argue whether the collapse of Israeli-Iranian relations could have been prevented. Some say the Shah was warned. Others say Mossad failed to predict the timing. One declassified report refers to Khomeini as a temporary religious figure who would fade with time. A miscalculation, to say the least. You step into a modest villa in Tel Aviv, where Israeli generals, now back home, sit around a breakfast table littered with half-finished reports. They speak in code, in past tense. We had leverage. We had visibility. Now we have nothing. The arms deals vanish. The pipeline from Eilat to Ashkelon, frozen. The military contracts, all nullified overnight. Israel loses more than a partner, it loses its entire eastern flank. You drift to the Iranian parliament, where a fresh-faced cleric reads aloud a condemnation of Israel, calling it the Little Satan. Alongside America's Great Satan, there's applause. Not just polite, fervent, can almost feel the heat from the political pivot. Years of hidden ties erased by a single wave of ideology. And just like that, Iran goes dark from Israel's perspective. Anyway, all that shared intelligence, those radar stations, those mutual military exercises gone. The maps are wiped clean. But not forgotten. A file remains in a locked cabinet in Tel Aviv labeled simply Persia. Inside are photos of old partners, airfields that were once shared, and letters now yellowing. The tone is not nostalgic, it's watchful. The Israeli press, at the time, doesn't cover it much. Too sensitive, too embarrassing. One editorial simply reads, "A friend lost, an empire changed." Back in Iran, the new regime is consolidating. Streets are renamed. Women's dress codes are enforced. Western books are removed from libraries. And anti-Israel rhetoric becomes a daily ritual woven into speeches, classrooms, and Friday prayers. The fringe detail. In one of the state-run television programs in early 1980, a rerun of an old Israeli-funded agricultural documentary accidentally airs. It's yanked within minutes. The editor reportedly disappeared from the network the next day. And yet, deep below the fury and the dogma, something lingers. You pass a shuttered warehouse outside Shiraz, still filled with half-installed Israeli-made irrigation systems. You see an old airbase hangar where the paint hasn't fully chipped off a Hebrew warning label. You hear a former pilot, under his breath, whisper that the Israeli gear just worked better. You walk into a Tehran cafe where the owner, an old man with cataract, clouded eye, still remembers the night an Israeli technician fixed his shortwave radio. He doesn't talk about it much, but he remembers. The alliance is gone, broken, buried. But history doesn't delete. It remembers, and so do you. The dust settles slowly after revolution, and you drift through it like a feather in the dim air. The year is now 1980, and Iran isn't just a different country, it's a different reality. Gone are the palace receptions and quiet meetings over sweet tea. Now the streets echo with chants, the posters are red with slogans. And the power belongs to black-turbaned clerics with fire in their eyes. Israel, once a silent partner in Iran's military dreams, is now the enemy. Officially, loudly, endlessly, you float above the city of Qom, where Khomeini has set up the new ideological epicenter of the Islamic Republic. The walls here don't just hold sermons, they radiate strategy. Khomeini isn't a passive spiritual leader. He's actively reshaping the country's alliances, its enemies, its very identity, and topping his new enemy list: the United States and Israel. In official speeches, Israel is painted as a colonizer, a puppet of Western imperialism, and the oppressor of Muslims. The language is sharp, rhetorical, But it's not just theater. The break is real. The regime has swept away every trace of the prior relationship, and any mention of Israel as a former ally is now heresy. But you remember, don't you? You were there. You watched the secret meetings, the joint projects, the strange but functional cooperation. Now it's all denied, rewritten, and censored from the record. Still, even in this new theocratic order, the past leaves shadows. You enter a storage room in Isfahan locked, dim, and gathering dust. On its shelves, crates of Israeli avionics, unused and still labeled in Hebrew. They're quietly repurposed or hidden altogether. You pass a mechanic who mutters, "It's good tech, but we can't be seen using it." Meanwhile, Israel watches from afar. Tel Aviv is buzzing with worry. The revolution has collapsed years of investment, shattered a rare strategic bridge, and empowered a radical regime ideologically opposed to Israel's existence. But more than anything else, there's a chilling awareness that Iran now sits on a mountain of Israeli-supplied weapons, intelligence systems, and technical knowledge. Some Israeli analysts joke bitterly, "We helped train the new enemy, congratulations to us." Others take it more seriously. Contingency plans are drawn. Dossiers updated. Military leaders begin reclassifying Iran not as a partner lost, but as a potential long-term adversary. The mood has shifted from disappointment to calculation. And as if on cue, Iraq steps in. Saddam Hussein, watching Iran unravel and sensing opportunity, launches an invasion in September 1980. Thus begins the Iran-Iraq War, brutal, grinding. 8-tier conflict that kills over 1 million people and reshapes the region forever. You're now walking through trenches carved into the borderlands of Khuzestan. The mud sticks to your boots. The air smells like oil and metal. Iranian soldiers, many barely older than teenagers, fire Soviet-era rifles. Behind them, battered command trucks carry salvaged Israeli communications gear. Yes, you read that right. Iran is now at war with Iraq, another former Israeli enemy, and it's using whatever it can find, including leftovers from an alliance it now publicly denies ever existed. Historians still argue whether Israel should have predicted this, whether its long-term interests were served by the arms deals with the Shah, whether it was short-sighted, or whether the revolution simply broke a system no one could have sustained. But Israel doesn't just analyze, it acts. You drift now to the Mediterranean coast, where a small Israeli naval team is preparing shipments not for Iran, of course. Not anymore, but for groups that might challenge Iran's growing revolutionary influence elsewhere. Quiet support flows to the Kurds, the Lebanese Maronites, and others who feel the tremors of Iran's ideological reach. Yet, even amid all the severed ties, a strange thing happens. A rumor begins to circulate in intelligence circles, murmurs that some parts of the Iranian military, now cut off from the West, are quietly reaching out to former contacts. Not politicians, not clerics, just desperate officers. Engineers, technicians who remember the manuals were in Hebrew and the parts were precise. You find yourself in a payphone booth in Zurich. A man in a trench coat, yes, the live dials a number, pauses, and says, "You know who I am. I know you still have parts we need." Operation channels, long thought dead, begin to flicker back to life, not officially, not proudly, but practically. Because Iran is isolated, sanctioned, bleeding, and Israel, well, Israel is still pragmatic. This brings you to one of the strangest, most ironic phases of their relationship. You stand on the edge of what becomes known as the Iran-Contra affair. The U.S., wanting to fund Nicaraguan rebels, but blocked by Congress, comes up with a labyrinthine plan involving arms sales to Iran through Israel. Yes, the same Iran that chants death to America and death to Israel in the streets every Friday. And yes, the same Israel now acting as a quiet middleman. The logic? Iran is at war with Iraq, and Iraq is seen by some in the West as the bigger threat. Supplying arms might encourage moderates in Iran and gain leverage to free American hostages held in Lebanon. It's moral gymnastics of Olympic proportion. You float above a warehouse near Tel Aviv where crates of spare parts are being prepared. Missiles, anti-tank weapons, parts for Hawk missile batteries all packed, relabeled, and shipped. Israel delivers them to Iran. Payment goes through Swiss banks. And somewhere in this mess, American officials are passing notes like it's a high school exam. You now peek into a Tehran office where Iranian military officers, some of whom were trained by Israelis back in the day, are uncrating the deliveries. No smiles, no thanks. Just the eerie familiarity of working with old tools, even when the builders are now enemies. The fringe tidbit. One crate of Hawk missile parts was apparently accompanied by a typed checklist still bearing an Israeli serial number. Someone scribbled it out with a Sharpie. Poorly, the Iran-Contra scandal eventually explodes into headlines. In America, it becomes a national disgrace. But in Iran and Israel, it's barely acknowledged. Too messy, too contradictory, too dangerous to admit. Still, it reveals a truth you already suspected. Necessity trumps ideology. Even the loudest enemies might whisper when the lights are off and the stakes are high. But as the 1980s close, things harden again. Khomeini dies in 1989, but the revolution survives him. His successor, Ayatollah Khomeini, inherits the ideological hostility toward Israel. And any hope of reconciliation fades further into fantasy. In Israel, a new generation grows up with Iran as a looming shadow, longer a fated partner, but an emerging threat. And in Iran, a younger clerical class rewrites the textbooks. Key, in the new version, Israel was always the enemy. The Shah was always a tyrant, and the revolution was always inevitable. You walk through a Tehran museum where a diorama shows Israeli-made rifles captured and denounced. There's no mention of cooperation, no hint of partnership, just staged villainy. But you know better, because history may be rewritten, but it's never erased. You redrifting now through twilight somewhere, between memory and myth hovering above. A shipping port where silence has taken over the steel cranes. The year is 1990, and the Cold War is fading fast. But if you think that means calm, think again. You re-entering an era when the past pretends to be forgotten, but continues to whisper from dark corners. Iran and Israel. The two won't speak now, not even in code. But beneath that frigid silence, something strange begins to happen. Indirect entanglement. You float just offshore, past a battered Iranian freighter chugging through the Persian Gulf. Somewhere in its rusting hull are replacement. Parts for military hardwares, some of it Soviet, some American, and, in a twist so absurd, it's tragic. It's tragicomic. Some of it originally made in Israel. The chain of supply is so twisted now that even the crates don't know where they reef from. And you begin to notice this isn't just tension anymore. It's shadow boxing. Iran and Israel, both isolated in their own ways, begin navigating the post-Cold War world with new anxiety. For Israel, the collapse of the Soviet Union is a mixed blessing. One less global adversary, sure, but more regional instability. And guess who's stepping into that instability with revolutionary flair? Yep, Iran. You find yourself in South Lebanon, where the hills are quiet but watchful. Hezbollah, once a loose militia, now a growing force, is consolidating power, funded, trained, and armed by Iran. And they've got one enemy consistently in their crosshairs: Israel. Historians still debate when Iran's proxy war strategy against Israel fully took shape. Some say the early 1990s. Others trace it back to the chaotic aftermath of the Lebanon War in 1982. But by now, it's crystal clear. Iran isn't confronting Israel directly at us, using others to do it. You float through a Hezbollah training camp in the Bekaa Valley. Young fighters run drills in muddy fields. Instructors hand out Kalashnikovs and black flags. Somewhere in the background, a senior advisor murmurs in Farsi, translated into Arabic. Iran's fingerprints are everywhere, just never officially acknowledged. And in Israel, the mood is shifting too. Tel Aviv, once filled with quiet nostalgia for a lost Iranian alliance, is now a bunker of caution. Intelligence reports pile high. Iranian Revolutionary Guard deployments are tracked hourly, and in the southern hills of Lebanon, Israeli troops begin facing not just angry villagers, but trained fighters backed with real firepower. You follow a soldier on patrol near the Litani River. He's 21, nervous eyes twitching toward every ridge. His unit knows that rockets now come from deeper, farther, with better precision. This isn't just guerrilla warfare anymore, it's state-funded proxy conflict. The old alliance is now a phantom that haunts every border. But here's the twist you didn't see coming. Even as Iran funds Hezbollah and Israel calls Iran the most dangerous state in the region, their economies become, how shall we say, accidentally entangled. You step into a trade office in Istanbul. Turkish customs officers are scratching their heads over a shipment of telecommunications parts. Iranian buyer, European middleman, Israeli manufacturer. Yep, it's still happening. Because in the messy maze of global capitalism, boycotts are more like guidelines. Israeli companies sell to third-party firms. Those firms sell to others. Somewhere down the line, it reaches Iran. In the 1990s, one Israeli cable manufacturer even suspected their fiber optics had ended up in an Iranian infrastructure project. When asked about it, the CEO reportedly sighed and said, "Well, money talks faster than politics walks." You drift now through the streets of Tehran, where the average citizen has no memory of Israel as anything but an enemy. The older generation might remember the days of the Shah, but they don't speak of them. Too dangerous, too confusing, and too contradictory for the official narrative. Meanwhile, Iran's leadership sharpens its rhetoric. The phrase Zionist regime becomes standard vocabulary in state media. Israel is blamed for regional unrest, for the suffering of Palestinians, for conspiracies ranging from economic sabotage to cultural invasion. And yet, beneath it all, pragmatism quietly bubbles. You step into a closed-door meeting of Israeli defense analysts in 1995. The room smells like stale paper and lukewarm espresso. They're reviewing ballistic missile developments in Iran, not Hezbollah's, not Syria's. Iran's own program, and it's getting more advanced. Some of those missiles bear a faint resemblance to Soviet-era Scuds. Others, well, they've got modifications that suggest either North Korean help or someone learned from old Israeli design principles once shared during the Shah's time. Fringe tidbit for you. A former Israeli engineer reportedly spotted a telemetry design used in Iran's Shahab missile series that was eerily similar to an early 1970s Israeli prototype. Coincidence? Maybe. But unsettling? Absolutely. In response, Israel ramps up missile defense. Projects like Arrow and Iron Dome begin their long development arcs, partly for Hezbollah rockets, but partly, quietly, for the long-range possibility that Iran will aim higher. You pause beside a whiteboard in the IDF's Strategic Planning Division. Written across the top in blue marker. What happens if Tehran turns east and west into launch vectors? This is not fear. This is foresight. And it only gets deeper. By the end of the 1990s, Iran has positioned itself as the anti-Israel powerhouse of the Middle East, not just in rhetoric, but in influence. Its alliances with Hezbollah, with Syria under the Assads, with emerging groups in Iraq, it's creating a regional arc of hostility. But the irony? The very systems it uses, radio tech, training protocols, logistics patterns, some of them are distant echoes of Israeli programs. Once handed over, now repurposed. You drift now through a Tehran bookstore. A young student flips through a history book. The section on Israel is sparse, accusatory, and full of redactions. No mention of the years of cooperation. No trace of the fact that Iran once depended on Israel for military infrastructure. Instead, there's a photo of a Palestinian child and a caption that reads, "Resistance is duty." You fly back across the sea to Haifa, where a retired Israeli intelligence officer smokes in silence. He doesn't say much anymore, but on his shelf, a photo faded of him standing beside an Iranian colonel in 1975, both smiling, holding a map, behind them a handwritten sign. Joint Training Week, he still keeps it, just not where anyone can see. You hover between the two countries over a churning sea of memory and denial. The 1990s end with rising tensions. Iran, richer now from post-war recovery and rising oil prices, becomes bolder in its regional moves. Israel grows more anxious. Missile programs expand. Proxy conflicts sharpen. The alliance they once shared, scrubbed from textbooks, but not from archives. Not from radar records. Not from those old unlisted phone numbers some men still have memorized, but will never dial again, and you float above the Mediterranean in silence, watching two countries grow further apart, even as the threads of history tangled, frayed, denied continue to bind them in ways neither is willing to fully admit. The new millennium hums awake under a quiet tension. The year is 2000. The Y2K bug didn't end the world, but something darker has been simmering while the clocks reset. You drift through the air like a digital breeze, watching two nations who once passed whispered notes across locked doors, now pretend they've even been in the same room, Iran and Israel. Their histories, once threaded together in the shadows, are now publicly split by oceans of ideology and steel. You begin in Jerusalem, where Israeli military officials are staring at satellite imagery of a desert site in central Iran. It's big, it's remote, it's not labeled on any official Iranian map, and it's starting to look like it's being built for something that doesn't just water crops or power toasters. It's Natanz. You zoom down into the dry Iranian landscape, into a maze of scaffolding and cranes. Below ground deep, heavily reinforced is a complex of centrifuges spinning uranium gas at thousands of RPM. Enrichment, Iran insists, for peaceful nuclear energy. Israel's reaction: a raised eyebrow, followed by 10 years of increasingly tense sleep. And just like that, the Israeli-Iranian relationship enters its nuclear phase. You hover in a quiet boardroom in Tel Aviv. The fluorescent lights hum. The faces around the table are serious sex Mossad, defense officials, atomic energy experts. One says they're at 3.5% now. Just power plant stuff. Another replies, you only need a short jump to 90%. Historians still argue whether Iran's program was always meant to produce weapons or whether it was militarized gradually as deterrence against regional threats. The ambiguity, though, is part of the point. For Israel, ambiguity is as scary as certainty. And so begins one of the strangest, quietest wars of the modern age, the cyber war. You slip through fiber optic cables now, invisible and swift. It's 2007. Somewhere in a lab run jointly by Israeli and American intelligence, a virus is being written. Not just any Verusa cyber weapon, precise, silent, and surgical. Its name, Stuxnet, and it's not meant to steal data. It's meant to destroy hardware, specifically the centrifuges at Natanz. The virus is released like a ghost, passed on infected USB drives by unsuspecting hands. When it hits the target, tells the machines to spin just a little too fast, then slow, then fast again, until the gears tear themselves apart. You're standing inside Natanz when it happens. There's no explosion, no alarms, just a soft worry sound, and then a click, followed by confusion, followed by panic. By the time Iranian engineers figure out what happened, it's too late. And the best part for the attackers anyway is that the virus masked its tracks. For months, the sabotage looks like bad maintenance. The fringe tidbit. One Iranian technician allegedly blamed Russian spare parts for the problem before Stuxnet's code was discovered. Talk about a red herring. You swing back to Tel Aviv, where the mood is cautiously triumphant. Israel has struck a major blow without firing a missile. But victory isn't so simple. Because Iran adapts. You slip into a facility in Forta-built, deep in the mountains, hardened against airstrikes, tucked into rock like a secret. Iran doubles down. More centrifuges, better security, more decentralization, and above all, more defiance. By the early 2010s, the standoff has become global. Iran insists its nuclear program is legal under the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel warns the world that it's being played. The tension builds. Prime Minister Netanyahu gives dramatic speeches, including the now iconic one with the cartoon bomb and the red marker line at the UN podium. You wince at the clip-art aesthetic, but the message is deadly serious. You drift into a Mossad safe house where agents pore over procurement data, shipment logs, and obscure company filings in Malaysia and Dubai. They're tracking every bolt, every pump, every carbon fiber casing headed toward Iran's nuclear program. And if those components vanish mysteriously en route, well, that's not coincidence. Meanwhile, Iran fights back in the shadows. You step into a Tehran cyber warfare unit. Yes, they have one now. Young recruits tap furiously at glowing keyboards. Target lists scroll by. Israeli banks, government websites, infrastructure systems. This isn't just hacking, it's revenge. And in 2012, things go physical again. A series of mysterious explosions ripple through Iranian military and nuclear facilities. One particularly deadly one takes out a top Revolutionary Guard missile expert. Iran points the finger. No prizes for guessing where. But it's not one-sided. You walk along the crowded streets of Tel Aviv, where Israeli diplomats and scientists live under increasing security. Because now, the payback comes in the form of assassinations. Iranian operatives, often working through proxies, begin targeting Israelis abroad. In places like Thailand, India, Georgia, one botched bombing in Bulgaria nearly escalates into a full-blown diplomatic crisis. This isn't just a Cold War anymore. It's a quiet war, always deniable, always in the background, always one miscalculation away from the real thing. And yet, despite everything, both countries still avoid full confrontation. Why? Because the cost would be unbearable. You hover over the Strait of Hormuz, where Israeli submarines are rumored to pass silently, their presence unconfirmed but understood. They carry second strike capabilities, nuclear-tipped missiles, just in case. Iran, meanwhile, develops its missile program with new urgency. The Shahab, the Ghada, the Sagegill. Medium range. Long range. Israel watches as the flight paths creep closer. You stop by an underground bunker near Haifa, where Israeli kids aged 10 practice donning gas masks in school drills. It feels like the early 90s again, but with a different threat. And then, in 2015, a moment of pause. You enter a grand hall in Vienna. Diplomats from the US, EU, China, Russia, and yes, Iran signed a joint comprehensive plan of action. The Iran nuclear deal. Iran agrees to limit its enrichment, accept inspections, reduce its stockpiles. In return, sanctions relief. Israel is not happy. You watch Netanyahu's face in slow motion as he condemns the deal, calls it dangerous, a mistake, a moment of weakness. Iran celebrates cautiously. Relief washes across its economy. Trade resumes. Planes are bought. Embassies hum again, but the peace is temporary. Historians still argue whether the nuclear deal was a real step toward de-escalation or just a stalling tactic. Was Iran sincere? Was Israel overreacting? Was the US naive? Take your pick. Because by 2018, the deal collapses. The US exits under a new president. Sanctions return, Iran restarts enrichment, and Israel, once again, gears up for containment. But here's the strangest part of all. As you drift over both countries past bunkers, labs, Intelligence headquarters, you realize that they still mirror each other. Both nations see themselves as embattled. Both build narratives of survival. Both operate with long memories and short tempers. And both continue to invest in technology, intelligence, and layered deterrence rather than trust. The ghost of their former alliance still haunts them, in air-based blueprints and leftover components, in the names of programs that haven't been updated since the 70s. You hover now over a rooftop in Tehran, where an elderly engineer looks out over the skyline. He once studied in Tel Aviv, long ago. He never talks about it. But sometimes, when no one's listening, he hums an old Hebrew tune he picked up during training. Just a few bars. Soft, almost forgotten. And in a high-rise in Tel Aviv, a retired Mossad officer flips through an old field manual marked Persia. He mutters, "They were good. Too good." And maybe, just maybe, they both remember. You glide now above a desert that holds secrets like it holds heat, quiet, unforgiving, and stretching out to every horizon. The sun rises slowly over the Iranian plateau, casting long shadows across missile silos. Half-buried radar dishes and satellite dishes aimed at the heavens, or at each other. It's the 2020s. Iran and Israel are no longer shadowboxing. They're squaring up in full view of the world. But instead of stepping into the ring, they fight from opposite corners with drones, sabotage, and proxies. This is the age of the gray zone, a conflict without declarations, without front lines, and without an end in sight. You float through a briefing room inside the Israeli Defense Forces headquarters. The walls are lined with flat screens showing footage from Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. Every pin on the map pulses like a heartbeat. Hezbollah's missile stockpile, Iranian Revolutionary Guard outposts, Iranian-made drones spotted in Yemen. The whole region is a chessboard, and Iran is placing pieces everywhere. Israel's response? Airstrikes. Lots of them, but never against Iran itself. You drop into the Syrian night, where Israeli F-35s, those stealthy, silent birds, swoop in to bomb Iranian weapons convoys headed for Hezbollah. The explosions light up the mountains, but the jets vanish before radar systems even catch a hint of their presence. The message is clear. We see you. We reach you. We're not going to let you breathe easy. And Iran adapts. You fly into a drone factory near Isfahan, where technicians in white coats and military fatigues assemble unmanned aerial vehicles, sleek, silent, and lethal. The models get better each year. More range, better payloads. A few even use stolen or borrowed Western components. Some of these drones wind up in Iraq, some in Syria, and some, even more alarmingly, in the hands of Russia during the Ukraine conflict. Fringe tidbit. Ukrainian soldiers have reportedly recovered drone fragments with instructions in Farsi and circuit boards sourced from American suppliers. Everyone's involved now. No one is really innocent. And Israel doesn't take kindly to Iranian drones in Europe. It tightens ties with NATO members. It conducts joint missile defense drills with Greece and Cyprus. It builds deeper relationships with Gulf states like the UAE, who are also not thrilled with Tehran's regional ambitions, which brings you to the most astonishing shift of all: the Abraham Accords. Suddenly, Israel is signing peace and normalization deals with countries that once stood firmly against it: Bahrain, the UAE, Morocco. And why now? Well, a big part of the answer wears a black turban and sponsors militias. Iran's growing influence terrifies the Arab Gulf states. So much so that they're willing to look past decades of animosity toward Israel and say, "Let's talk." You float through the halls of a luxury hotel in Abu Dhabi where Israeli business people shake hands with Emirati officials over cybersecurity deals. No one says it out loud, but they all know. We're here because of Iran. Historians still debate whether Iran anticipated this outcome or accidentally created it. Some say the revolutionary regime overplayed its hand. Others believe it simply underestimated how quickly fear can turn rivals into reluctant allies. Meanwhile, Tehran leans further into its axis of resistance. Hezbollah remains a cornerstone. So do Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But now Iran also cultivates ties with the Houthis in Yemen. Shia militias in Iraq, even Afghan fighters pulled in by ideology or necessity. You stand in a dusty compound near the Iraq's area border, where a group of Iranian-backed militia commanders meet in the flickering light of a satellite phone. Their goals vary, but their funding flows from a single source. You hear one of them say, "Israel thinks it fights shadows, but we are roots." It sounds poetic, till you realize those roots now span from the Mediterranean to the Red Sea. Back in Israel, security budgets balloon. New radar systems, new counter-drone units, new underground bunkers. Civilians are trained to handle mass rocket barrages and the Iron Dome. It hums every few nights, intercepting missiles launched from Gaza or the Syrian Golan. One night in April 2021, you float above an Iranian nuclear facility at Natanz. Again, the lights flicker. There's a hum. Then, boom, another accident. Another round of speculation. Was it a cyber attack? A bomb? Did someone sneak in? Iran blames Israel. Israel doesn't confirm. But everyone knows. And then comes the biggest escalation yet. In 2023, Iran launches a drone and missile barrage not just through proxies, but directly at Israeli territory for the first time in decades. You're hovering over the Negev desert, when the sky lights up like a pinball machine. Air defense systems whir, missiles streak through the air, and for a moment, the line between cold conflict and hot war wavers, but it doesn't tip over. Why? Because each side still knows. Direct war would be devastating for everyone, so they keep to the shadows, just more aggressive ones. You drift now into the Iranian parliament chamber. Politicians denounce the Zionist regime with fire and fury, but behind closed doors, some are more strategic. Iran isn't just saber-rattling, it's reorienting toward China, toward Russia, toward a new world order where it isn't boxed in by Western alliances. Its ties with Beijing strengthen, its trade with Moscow expands, and it sees Israel as a Western outpost worth weakening politically, economically, and ideologically. But even now, the echoes of their past remain. A decommissioned Iranian fighter jet still holds a few cockpit parts stamped with Hebrew lettering. A retired Israeli officer writes a memoir and barely mentions the Iran chapter because it's too complex. And in a university library in Tehran, a graduate student stumbles on a 1976 engineering text donated by an Israeli technical delegation. She reads it. She doesn't understand the context, just the science. There are moments of strange overlap. You enter a cybersecurity lab in Tel Aviv. On a monitor, a simulated cyber attack sourced from an IP address in Tehran. The Israeli student running the simulation laughs and says, "They're good." His partner replies, "They learned from us." And you realize this isn't just a story of enmity. It's a story of estranged kin, of two nations who once worked in secret, dreamed in parallel, and then drifted violently apart. They no longer speak, but they respond. Like mirror images, always watching, always planning, always waiting for the other to blink. As the 2020s unfold, the conflict is no longer about old alliances. It's about control of narratives, proxies, airspace, cyberspace, influence. It's less about what happened and more about what might happen next. And you're still floating through it all. Through the shadows of abandoned airfields, through the buzz of intercepted signals, through the quiet acknowledgments that, behind the fury, lie decades of complicated memory. Because history never forgets, especially when both sides try so hard to erase it. You pass now into the hush before dawn, hovering over ancient Earth, humming power grids and dim-lit war rooms. The line between memory and momentum blurs. For Iran and Israel, the story has become less about what was and more about what might be. And what might be, well, it feels heavier with each passing year. It's 2024, and you find yourself in an elevator descending deep below a nondescript building on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. The doors open with a sigh, and you step into a secure facility bathed in pale light. A wall-length screen shows satellite images of Fordo and Natanz. But now there's a third site, Arik, the heavy water reactor, reactivated, modified, less known. Israel's analysts lean forward. Their brows don't lift anymore, not with this kind of news. Because while international headlines still swirl around Gaza, Lebanon, and the West Bank, here in the concrete silence, the obsession is uranium. You move to Tehran, past ministries and mosques, and down into another bunker not far from the IRGC headquarters. Here, Iranian engineers monitor enrichment levels, security firewalls, and new generation centrifuges that hum like angry bees. Above ground, politicians chant familiar slogans. Below, the pace is relentless. And in this space, you realize something eerie. Neither side fully trusts what the other says, but they both trust what the other builds. You hover in Vienna again, yes. That diplomatic ballroom where the nuclear deal once lived. The JCPOA is a ghost now. Every now and then, talks restart. Sometimes in Doha. Sometimes in Geneva, smiles are exchanged. Handshakes staged, but the trust dead on arrival. Historians still argue whether the nuclear deal was ever about peace or just buying time. Some say Iran never planned to keep its promises. Others argue the West backed out first, and Israel. Israel never believed in it to begin with, so the story now moves into sabotage, surveillance, and deep cover operations straight out of a Cold War thriller. Yuri walking alongside a man in a motorcycle helmet on a quiet Tehran street in 2020. He's got a small device hidden under his jacket. His target, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, Iran's top nuclear scientist. The hit is swift, shocking, surgical, unreportedly, remote-controlled. Iran blames Israel. Israel remains silent, but silence doesn't mean denial. And Tehran hears the message. We still know where you are. Fakhrizadeh's assassination becomes a national trauma in Iran. His funeral is broadcast like a state wedding. His work, once semi-secret, becomes legendary overnight. School children learn his name. Engineers study his notes. And in doing so, Iran turns loss into legacy. You're back in Israel now, where Mossad files stack like bricks. Their sources, eyes, ears, pixels, code. Some gathered the old-fashioned way, others leaked from foreign banks. Some pulled from inside Iran itself. Yes, inside. Because here's another layer in the labyrinth. The Iranian opposition. You find yourself in a modest home in California, where an Iranian exile sips tea and scrolls through encrypted messages. He's part of a growing diaspora of activists, defectors, analysts, many of whom provide intelligence to foreign governments, including, sometimes, Israel. The irony, while Iran funds groups to fight Israel on its borders, some Iranians fight their own regime with Israel's help. The web gets weirder the deeper you go. And it's not just politics anymore. It's culture, identity. It's the daily, tangled contradiction of two peoples whose governments hate each other, but whose histories and futures keep rhyming. In Israel, Persian-language TV channels beam content into Iran via satellite. News, music, soap operas. Some are US-based, some are Israeli, but the viewers, millions. You hover in a small apartment in Mashhad, where a grandmother watches a Hebrew-dubbed nature documentary. She whispers. Their voice is calm, like ours used to be. And in Tel Aviv, a Persian restaurant quietly plays old Iranian love songs from the 1960s before everything fell apart. No signs, no flags, just music. Fringe tidbit. An Israeli pop singer with Iranian roots once released a cover of a famous pre-revolutionary Persian ballad. It went viral in both countries. No governments involved, just nostalgia. But the present keeps pulling forward. You now move through Azerbaijan, yes, the neighbor often caught between Iranian paranoia and Israeli strategy. Israel and Azerbaijan have built strong military and intelligence ties, and guess who doesn't like that? Correct? Iran. In 2022, tensions flared as Iranian troops conducted drills near the border, warning Baku not to become an Israeli launching pad. The chessboard now includes the Caucasus. Iran accuses Azerbaijan of harboring Israeli agents. Israel, as usual, doesn't blink. And then you float over the Red Sea, where Iranian ships shadow Israeli-linked cargo vessels, or attack them outright. In return, mysterious underwater mines appear near Iranian tankers. No one claims responsibility, but everyone knows. Meanwhile, the public face of the conflict grows more digital. Iranian state media blames Israel for economic sabotage, assassinations, droughts, earthquakes, you name it. Israeli news calls Iran the world's leading state sponsor of terror almost daily. And yet beneath all the rage, there are ghosts. You're inside an abandoned building in Tehran, once used as an Israeli commercial office. The furniture is gone. The windows broken. But on the floor, half covered in dust, is a map of oil pipelines. Old, annotated, once hopeful. You see Iran's younger generation digitally savvy, globally curious, and increasingly disillusioned. Many don't share their leader's rage. They protest hijabs, demand rights, and, in private, say things like, "We should talk to everyone." Even Israel. You float into an underground student gathering in Shiraz. One girl says, "We're not our government." A boy replies, "Neither are they." And in Israel, young people grow up only knowing Iran as a threat. They see missile drills on the news. But a few curious ones dig deeper into family archives, into YouTube videos, into stories from grandfathers who once trained in Tehran. One Tel Aviv architecture student posts a design project inspired by ancient Persian vaults. In the comments, an Iranian student writes, "You did it justice." Neither mentions politics, just art. You realize then, the conflict is real and dangerous. But the distance between the people might not be, because buried beneath the layers of betrayal, denial, fear, and fury is a strange kind of familiarity, one that might not save them, but might someday soften the edge. If you listen closely, under the radar chirps and the drone propellers and the chants on loudspeakers, you'll hear it. The echo of what once was, and the question of what might still be. You drift now between deadlines and headlines, the near present thick with possibility and peril. The year is 2025. The world spins faster, its crises overlapping. But the ancient tension between Iran and Israel remains unchanged in its intensity, evolved in its form. You hover above a conference center in Doha, its air conditioning humming like a whisper. Delegates from across the region gather for a de-escalation summit. The Iranian envoy gives a passionate speech about sovereignty, dignity, and Western hypocrisy. Across the room, an Israeli observer, unofficially present, keeps his face blank. They don't speak, they don't shake hands. But their countries are very much aware of each other's every move. This is diplomacy in the 21st century. Cold stares, quiet maneuvers, and a steady stream of back-channel signals. Back in Tehran, the supreme leader delivers a televised address. His voice is steady, his message is sharp. Israel is illegitimate, immoral, and a regional threat. But this isn't just rhetoric, it's strategy. Iran needs a villain, a unifying external enemy to rally support at home, especially as internal dissent simmers once again. You move through crowded Iranian cities where water shortages, economic struggles, and generational frustration bubble under the surface. Tehran's skyline may glitter, but its power grids falter. And as domestic pressure builds, so too does the appeal of blaming someone else. Someone far away, but ever present in the narrative. Israel and Israel. It's ready. Always ready. You float over a defense ministry installation near Beersheba. A new layer of missile defense has been activated. It's not just Iron Dome anymore, it's Arrow 3, David's Sling, and laser systems straight out of science fiction. The threat matrix includes cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, loitering drones, and cyber attacks. The simulations are constant. The assumptions grim. Historians still debate whether Israel's defensive posture is truly defensive, or whether it's prelude to something larger. A first strike, a strategic decapitation. The doctrine has shifted, hardened, thickened with urgency. And underneath it all, another battlefield emerges. Artificial intelligence. You pass through the data centers of both nations, Israel's in Negev tech parks, Iran's in nondescript concrete blocks ringed with guards. Here, cyber operators train AI models to detect patterns, break encryptions, or simulate misinformation campaigns. Chatbots parrot propaganda. Algorithms flag dissent. Code becomes ammunition. In 2024, a strange incident occurs. Israeli hospital systems are hit with ransomware. The government never confirms the source. But analysts wink in one direction. Iran, meanwhile, reports an unexplained blackout at a key research center. Coincidence? Of course not. And so you wander through the new no man's land, cyberspace. It's not just critical infrastructure anymore. It's your bank, your school, your light bulb. And both Iran and Israel have elite units dedicated to navigating, attacking, and defending these invisible domains. Fringe tidbit. A 2023 cyber attic on a dating app in Tel Aviv. Briefly exposed profiles, including some belonging to Mossad personnel. No harm done, but very awkward. And yet, even as conflict deepens, something unexpected begins to grow. Curiosity. You fly into clubhouse rooms and Telegram channels where Iranians and Israelis sometimes, somehow, find each other, carefully, anonymously. A few dozen people in a virtual space, just talking. Comparing lives, swapping music. Sometimes arguing, more often, listening. I didn't know your grandparents were refugees too, one Iranian user says. I didn't know you had Jewish friends. An Israeli girl replies. These moments are fragile, deleted quickly, monitored by state watchers. But they happen, not often, not loudly, but enough to remind you that people, unlike governments, can get curious instead of defensive. Meanwhile, the flashpoints multiply. In the Red Sea, Israel joins a coalition to counter Iranian-backed Houthi attacks on shipping routes. In Syria, another Israeli airstrike takes out a convoy carrying precision-guided missiles allegedly bound for Hezbollah. In Iraq, an explosion rocks a Shia militia base. Iran blames Mossad. And back in Gaza, tensions erupt again. Iran supports Palestinian factions, both ideologically and materially. Israel responds with overwhelming force. Civilians suffer. The cycle repeats. The world protests. And in the middle, Tehran and Tel Aviv sharpen their knives with every exchange. You move through underground tunnels near Raif, where Iranian weapons have flowed for years, sometimes as parts, sometimes fully assembled. A young fighter holds up a shoulder-launched missile and whispers, "From our brothers." But when asked who those brothers are, he smiles and doesn't answer. And you move now to Haifa, to a family sheltering during an air raid. They don't know whether the incoming rocket came from Hamas, Hezbollah, or a longer arm. All they know is that the siren gives them 30 seconds. Israel's policy, zero tolerance. Maximum retaliation, Iran's strategy. Maximum pressure, minimum footprint. They're in different leagues, but the same game. And then there's the nuclear question, always hanging like a storm cloud that won't break, but won't go away either. Iran edges closer to weapons-grade enrichment, all while denying it has any such intention. Israel draws red lines, again, and again. Intelligence assessments flicker across government terminals in both countries. Strike, delay, negotiate, wait. You find yourself in a top-secret Israeli simulation room. A scenario unfolds. Iranian warheads deployed. Israeli response launched. Aftermath catastrophic. The operators pause. No one cheers. It's not a game they want to win. It's one they hope never starts. Back in Tehran, a political advisor whispers to a journalist, "We don't want war, but we want them to think we're not afraid of one." The journalist writes something tamer, but the real quote echoes in your mind. Still, among all this doom and posturing, strange ironies persist. A shipment of Israeli agricultural technology routed through two intermediaries quietly makes its way into Iranian farms. It's repackaged. No one admits where it's from. But the tomatoes grow better. An Iranian AI startup tries to patent a system using software libraries developed by Israeli engineers. And a European academic conference on Middle Eastern water management features two papers, one Iranian, one Israeli. The organizers make sure they don't speak on the same panel. But during the coffee break, you hear one murmur. "I liked your methodology." They nod. No photos, just respect. And maybe, just maybe, that's what survives beneath the rubble of rage. Respect. Respect for history, for science. For the shared reality that both nations, in all their defiance and distrust, are more intertwined than they dare to admit. You pull back now, high above the region. The night air is calm. The borders glow faintly. And even in this silence, you feel the pulse of surveillance drones, fiber optic cables, encrypted messages, coded warnings. Iran and Israel are not in open war, but they are nowhere near peace. And in this middle ground, where facts are twisted and futures are hedged, one truth lingers. They remember each other, no matter how hard they pretend otherwise. The evening quiet hums like an old refrigerator steady, faintly electric. And full of tension you don't notice until it's gone. You're drifting now above the Middle East, under a navy sky stitched with stars. Below, lights flicker from cities that have braced against history for decades. Tehran, Tel Aviv, Haifa, Shiraz, the soft glow of two civilizations locked in opposition. And something more complicated. It's no longer just politics or power, it's legacy now. Identity. The past creeping into textbooks, into music, into national mythologies. And the weirder part, Iran and Israel still define themselves, in part, against each other. You float into a museum in Jerusalem, where an exhibit on the Shadow War includes a photo of Iran's nuclear complex taken by satellite, printed in grayscale, labeled with cautious neutrality. A high school class walks by, chattering. One boy stops and whispers, "Do you think they're gonna bomb us?" His friend shrugs, "Only if we blink first." Meanwhile, in Tehran, a textbook used in 10th grade history features a grainy photo of the 1979 revolution. Below it, a caption blames foreign influence, Zionism, and the corrupted hands of Western puppeteers. Israel is never mentioned directly, but everyone knows who's being discussed. And yet, if you dig deeper beneath the surface of state narratives, you find something stranger. A memory that refuses to stay buried. You're sitting now with an Iranian grandmother who remembers the 1960s. "We had Israeli doctors," she says, folding bread over a bowl of stew. "They helped build our hospital. No one hated them then." She doesn't raise her voice. T just lowers it. And in a Tel Aviv archive, a historian pores over engineering blueprints from 1977. "These were designed with Iranian terrain in mind," he says. Before everything changed, his voice has that distant tone, half academic, half nostalgic. Historians still debate how deep the pre-revolution Iran-Israel alliance really went. Some argue it was transactional, oil for tech, security for silence. Others insist it was far deeper, a mutual trust born of shared regional fears and isolated ambitions. But now, all that's left are fragments, broken relationships, scrubbed files, old cassette tapes found in the back of dusty drawers. And yes, those tapes matter. You drift into a quiet apartment in Berlin where an Iranian exile plays one. It's a bootleg of an Israeli radio broadcast from 1975. Soft pop music. Then a Persian voice cuts in, welcoming listeners to a new trade initiative. Together, we can build something lasting. It says, the irony could eat you alive, because nothing lasted. You move forward now into the cultural cold, war not fought with bombs or bugs, but with movies, music, memory. Iranian state media produces documentaries blaming Israel for everything from the Palestinian crisis to regional droughts. They're dramatic slow-motion affairs filled with ominous narration and piano music in a minor key. And on the other side, Israeli TV shows feature Iranian villains as hackers, spies, or nuclear scientists, usually brilliant, usually dangerous, often suspiciously good-looking. It's propaganda as performance art, but it seeps in. Still, the cultural undercurrents flow both ways. On YouTube, a bootleg video titled "When Iran and Israel Were Friends" racks up hundreds of thousands of views. Comments range from "Bring back the Shah" to "We were better off apart." A few say nothing, just post candle emojis. Then there's the music. In Israel, a new wave of Mizrahi artists with Persian roots dig into old melodies, blending them with trap beats, synth pads, and smoky vocals. The lyrics, it's mostly about longing, sometimes about identity, never about politics. In Iran, underground rappers slip Hebrew phrases into their flows not in support, but in irony, satire, complexity. And yet, the fact that it happens at all tells you something. Fringe tidbit. In 2022, a Tehran-based DJ was briefly detained after sampling a vintage Israeli synth track in a lo-fi set. Authorities didn't recognize it until someone posted the original. The clip went viral, but was swiftly taken down. You pass through universities now, where academic boycotts and bans are normal. Iranian students can't cite Israeli journals. Israeli academics are blocked from publishing in Iranian-led conferences. And yet, backchannels buzz, encrypted emails, pseudonymous preprints, quiet collaboration on climate data or seismic modeling. No one acknowledges it publicly, but the work gets done. And in these underground exchanges, you feel something else. Curiosity, the simple human itch to know even the enemy. A professor in Haifa reads Farsi just well enough to parse an environmental report from Tehran. He doesn't have to, but he does. A student in Esfahan somehow finds a Hebrew to Persian physics glossary online. No explanation, no trace of the uploader. Just a message at the top. Learning should be free. Meanwhile, the fight continues in the open. The Israeli Knesset passes legislation to further define Iran as a national threat. More budget is allocated to cyber defense, anti-missile research, and regional surveillance. Iran responds with military drills, war games staged in deserts near the Persian Gulf. Soldiers scream slogans into the wind. Drones buzz like angry wasps overhead. The rhetoric spikes again. Tehran calls Israel a tumor. Tel Aviv accuses Iran of plotting regional destabilization. Allies line up behind each side, but everyone knows direct war is still too dangerous. Because underneath the rage is the unspoken truth. They know each other too well. They know each other's playbooks, their weaknesses, their pressure points. And perhaps most dangerously, they know what war would cost. You pull back to a wide aerial view now. The region below is like a board game long past fun. So many pieces, so many rules, and no one really winning. Yet amid the mistrust and brinksmanship, a few odd olive branches float by. An Iranian dissident filmmaker praises an Israeli documentary on trauma and exile. An Israeli medical NGO quietly provides treatment for children from countries that refuse to recognize it, including, once or twice, children whose paperwork was intentionally vague. And maybe, someday, those moments will matter. But not yet. For now, Iran and Israel remain locked in something more dangerous than war and more exhausting than peace. The eternal almost. Almost allies, almost enemies, almost human to each other. You pause now over the desert, letting the wind carry your thoughts east to west. You wonder if the sand remembers when their planes once flew side by side, when their doctors shared lab notes, when their leaders spoke if only in code. Because time doesn't erase history, it just buries it under newer, louder noise. But sometimes it whispers. And if you lean close enough, you'll still hear the echoes. You begin your final descent, now not into an ending, but into a quiet that's wrapped in tension, wrapped in hope, wrapped in layers of what if. It's 2025 still. The headlines say nothing new. Iran warns. Israel responds. A suspected cyber attack hits a power plant. A high-level defection gets rumors flying. Talks stall, talks resume. Talks stall again. It's the same waltz, just with sharper shoes. But what no one says out loud, what? Only the tired eyes of analysts and old soldiers admit is this. They're both waiting. Waiting for the next slip, the next explosion, the next speech that crosses some unspoken line, but also waiting for something harder to name. A shift, a miracle, a moment of clarity. You drift over Tel Aviv, where a cafe fills slowly with artists and students. The air smells like burnt coffee and beach salt. Someone plays a mournful guitar riff, and someone else mutters, "I heard my grandfather spoke Persian once." No one corrects him. Maybe they just like the story. You slide over Tehran, where the call to prayer echoes through neighborhoods lit half by neon, half by candle. A young engineer sits on her balcony, staring at the stars, coding something not entirely legal but beautiful. On her desk, a book translated from Hebrew. She keeps the cover hidden. These aren't acts of rebellion. They're acts of remembering. And what they remember isn't just history. It's that once these two nations found common ground. Through backchannels, through shared enemies, through necessity maybe. But it happened. And that means it could happen again. Historians still argue whether it ever really counted. Whether the alliance was real or just convenience dressed as cooperation. But those same historians, late at night, will admit over drinks. It was something. And something is rare in a region built on binary loyalties. You move now to Dubai, where Israeli and Iranian expats accidentally end up at the same table during a tech expo mixer. They laugh nervously. Then someone says, "So, do you guys have terrible airports too? And the ice breaks?" Not a lot, just enough. And in Berlin, a Jewish Iranian poet publishes a book called Two Names, One Silence. The subtitle reads, "For the homes we lost and the homes we built in spite of them. Some things can only be told in verse." You glide into a UN chamber where the usual dance unfolds. Iran condemns Israeli aggression. Israel calls out Iranian proxies. The speeches get archived, forgotten, repeated next year. But one delegate from a small nation says something different. Perhaps the only thing these two powers share now is fear. And the only thing more dangerous than mutual hatred is mutual fear. It doesn't make headlines, but it sits heavy in the air. Because fear, when left to grow, becomes policy, becomes doctrine, becomes missiles, walls, sanctions, silence. But it can also become something else. Caution, reflection. A strange kind of intimacy that only adversaries know, like ex-lovers who remember each other's tells, like old sparring partners who know when the other is bluffing. You land now in a classroom in northern Israel. The teacher writes Iran on the whiteboard. There's a pause. Then a boy raises his hand and says, "Didn't we used to be friends?" The teacher hesitates, then nods. A long time ago. And in Isfahan, a history teacher takes a risk, pulls up an old photo of Iranian and Israeli engineers smiling at a damn sight. The class is silent. No one takes out a phone. but the image lingers. You pass over archives, libraries, graveyards, bunkers, over names etched in stone and names erased from record, over forgotten handshakes and remembered betrayals. And you realize this story isn't ending. It's looping, evolving, like languages, like scars. It's not just geopolitics. It's a parable, a warning whispered in every corridor of power. What you build in secret may outlive your silence, and what you burn down out of fear may haunt your grandchildren. Now you hover above a quiet piece of earth between nations. Not a battlefield, just a stretch of dust and time. You imagine just for a second a flagless meeting here. 2 chairs. No cameras, no applause. Just 2 people with tired hands and too many ghosts. And maybe, someday, someone sits down first. Because in a conflict this long, this strange, this intimate, the smallest act might carry the most weight. A pause, a nod, a sentence that begins not with "you did this," but with "I remember when we." That's all it takes, sometimes, not for peace, but for possibility. And that quiet, fragile, flickering like a desert candle is enough to end this story. For now, before you drift off completely, let's soften the pace even more. The tension, the shadows, the circuits, and speeches, they can fade now. Let them melt away, like footprints in sand long after the wind has blown through. You're not in a bunker. You're not in a war room. You're not tracing centrifuges or decoding intent. You're just here in this moment, in your room, under your blanket, safe and still. Take a long, deep breath. In through your nose, out through your mouth. The hum of conflict becomes a whisper. The voices of history quiet themselves to a lull, and what's left is just space. Empty, peaceful, forgiving space. The kind where new thoughts might one day grow, thoughts of connection or even reconciliation. But that's not your job tonight. That's tomorrow's world to build. Right now, the only thing you need to do is rest. You're allowed to forget the timelines, the acronyms, the debates. You're allowed to imagine a world where old enemies simply run out of energy to fight, where memory becomes a bridge, not a blade, and where stories like this, heavy and strange as they are, remind you just how vast and how weirdly human our world really is. Let your mind float. Let your breath deepen. Let the lights dim in the desert, in the cities, in your thoughts. And if you dream tonight, maybe it'll be quiet, just quiet enough.